It began here, on a cold, gray day in December, 1863, on the banks of the Missouri, at the muddy little village of Omaha, in Nebraska Territory. And here, 1,800 miles west, where the Sacramento and the American rivers meet, the new capital of California, Sacramento. At the groundbreaking ceremonies for the Central Pacific Railroad, Governor Leland Stanton was addressing the crowd.
I congratulate you upon the commencement of this great work, which is the result of the state of California and the Pacific Coast. Yes, to the nation itself.
Carlos Huntington, Vice President of the Central Pacific Railroad, was understandably cynical about the difficulties of construction. Who could build a railroad across mountains like the Sierras?
You want to be jubilant over the driving of the first part? Go ahead. I don't. The mountains over there is much too ugly, and I can see too much work ahead. We made rail. Anyone can drive a first pipe, but there are many months of labor and unrest between the first and the last pipe.
Wood for ties to support the iron rails, and the driving of the spikes began. The Central Pacific started east towards Omaha. Near Omaha, the Union Pacific was looking westward across the plains. The financial and supply problems of construction were staggering. One day, in mid-November of 1865, General William T. Sherman rode to the end of the track.
This is a great enterprise, but I hardly expect to live to see it completed.
The Civil War had ended. Supplies and labor were becoming more abundant. Charles Carter, construction supervisor for the Central Pacific, began to hire Chinese immigrants. Out on the prairie, General Jack Keatsman and his brother Dan had contracted with the Union Pacific for track labor and much of the grading. By spring 1866, the track layers, working several miles behind the graders, were laying better than a mile of track a day. They attacked the level flat valley with 100 teams of horses and 1,000 men. brought intense heat across the prairie. Work was a gigantic effort. When winter came, driving blizzards raked the open plains, making work impossible. Beginning not far from Omaha and continuing all the way to Utah, physical hardship took its toll. Harsh working conditions and raids by Native Americans caused many to die. Those who fell often left only personal belongings to mark their passing.
Group of 3 men left last Friday to see the policeman for a cut. About 5 miles from here. It's been snowing since that night. Should have been back 3 days ago. We still haven't seen him.
This morning, the entire party laid out a sidetrack for our temporary bridge. We heard last night that the Indians were fighting hard yesterday. They killed 2 men in our forward party.
In 1866, the Union Pacific wintered west of Omaha at the fork of the Platte River. The construction crews became restless during the winter months. They were eager for a change of pace. The result was this first hell on wheels called North Platte. This type of town followed the railroad crews all the way to Promontory Summit in northern Utah. As the Union Pacific remained idle in North Platte during the bitter cold winter of 1866 and 67. 1,000 miles to the west, the Central Pacific was storming the Sierra Nevada. The torrential spring rains in the Dutch Flats area, as it's cited. And the army of Chinese immigrants, which now numbered 10,000, began tumbling through the solid granite toward the summit of Thunder Pass. For 2 years, they would labor in the bitter cold granite caves. And with simple tools, immense endurance, and courage, accomplish a feat of excavation and construction never before equaled in the railroad history. The summit tunnel was to be the longest on any railroad, 1,659 feet through solid ground.
Now, the Chinese experiment has proved eminently successful. They're faithful and industrious. Many of them are becoming experts in drilling and blasting, and the other departments are following.
With black powder, hammer, and chisel, they moved forward at the agonizing rate of about 8 inches a day. As the titanic snows of that winter began to bury the summit in a 40-foot vault, the Chinese gangs carved snow tunnels from their shacks to the excavations. In some instances, the camps were carried away by snowslides, and the men were buried. Many of them were not found until the snow melted the next spring. Working round-the-clock shifts, they seldom saw daylight through that long and bitter winter. The Central Pacific laid only 39 miles of track during 1866 at a cost of $8 million. But those 39 miles made them the most difficult ever surmounted by any railroad. The crushing snows and 0-degree weather that had confined the Union Pacific's track force to North Platte was followed by devastating floods in spring. But despite the floods, the Union Pacific reached Cheyenne in mid-November of 1867. In April of 1868, Casement's work team moved over and down the west slope of the Wyoming Black Hills and founded land. As the graders pushed west, the country became more and more desolate and sterile. 1868 was a remarkable year of progress for Central Pacific's James Strobridge. His Chinese graders and Irish track layers put down 350 miles of track across the Nevada desert at better than a mile per working day.
The alkali is always in our throats and nostrils. Many are breathing at the lungs. The water, too, is unfit to drink, and even useless for making steam, owing to foreign substances held in solution.
By Christmas week, 1868, the Union Pacific tracks had reached Echo Canyon, Utah. With the United States Congress and the heads of both railroads unable to agree on where the tracks should meet, both railroads went dashing across Utah from opposite directions. The race was on. Each company was trying to reach Ogden first, and thus control the traffic and trade of the Great Salt Lake Basin. The Union Pacific reached Ogden first on March 3rd, 1869. A month later, its tracks had reached Corinth, 25 miles to the north and west. By then, the Central Pacific was still west of the northern part of the Great Salt Lake, and since no meeting point had yet been agreed upon, the grading gangs of both railroads were pushing on as fast as possible. All across Promontory, in a final burst of fierce competition, the railroads were building grade alongside each other in opposite directions. This frantic competition finally ended on April 9th. Promontory Summit was the connection point agreed upon. All grading ended 2 days later. The following week, the track layers had narrowed their gap to only 50 miles. And in a final burst of enthusiasm, the Central Pacific laid 10 miles of track in one day. The Union Pacific sent engine 119 heading for Promontory, the last end of the track. Leland Stanford's special train, towed by a locomotive named Jupiter, advanced down the Central Pacific line.
That's not the smokestack. You've already got this, haven't you?
The morning of May 10th, 1869, was bright, clear,
You're gonna miss-
and cool at Promontory Summit. A telegrapher's key awaited the hand that would tell the world that the Atlantic touches the Pacific. We have done great. Despite
There can never be in the history of railroad enterprise on this continent another occasion so full of promise for triumph and mutual celebration as that we celebrate today. The printing press, the steam engine, the telegraph. Wow, it opens a whole new era.
That first thin line of iron rails was a fact. And more than that, a prophecy, a portent of things to come. And they came fast. There was the swift extermination of the once great buffalo herds. Hunters and supplies were carried right into the field by the railroad, and the hides transported back to eastern markets. The Indian Wars ended. With the buffalo gone, the way of life of the Plains Indians disappeared. This was the end of the frontier, symbolic only at first of what soon would be. The myth of the great American despot destroyed, by the national attention focused on the building of the railroad, and thus on the land it traversed. Then came the great human tide of immigrants, flowing out of Europe to America. They were carried into the far heartlands of the nation by the railroads. For decades, railroading was to dominate the American imagination. In the span of one man's lifetime, it would help build the United States into a world power. This was the beginning of something new, a new force ramming forward. The spanning of the continent like iron rail.
Good afternoon, visitors. We direct your attention to the last spike site for a special demonstration run by the Central Pacific Locomotive Jupiter and the Union Pacific Locomotive number 119. To ensure safe demonstration, please do not place any objects on the track, stay back at least 15 feet to avoid steam, and listen to the ranger for further instructions. Thank you and have a great day at Golden Spike National Historical Park. How are we all doing today? Doing good? All right, my name is Raider Sarah. I'll be with you throughout our 1 o'clock steam demonstration. Throughout the entire demonstration, just have some safety warnings for you today. I'm going to ask you to stay 15 feet back from the tracks at all times. So that'll be behind the barrel or the rail ties that you see to either side of me. When we're over on this side of tracks, it means staying behind the ropes. I'm also going to ask that you do not place anything on the tracks before, during, or after any of our demonstrations today. And just a little warning that these bells and whistles can be pretty loud. So if you have sensitive hearing, if you have any pets with you, anything like that, don't be afraid to cover your ears and hold on to your loved ones, all right? Another thing is that we do have a heat advisory today. It's supposed to get pretty hot this afternoon. So make sure you're drinking water, make sure you're aware of yourself and the people you're with. If you would like to go on the back porch to hang out in the shade or even inside the visitor center and watch the demonstration from there, I will not take offense if you choose to do so, all right? So first we're going to have the Jupiter back up along this line of tracks and then return to the last spike site. We'll then follow that with the 119 backing up, coming along the side and close to the visitor center, backing up again and returning to the last spike site. Do you have any questions about the demonstration? All right, in that case, I think we're about good to go. We're going to give these gentlemen in the cab the highball. And a highball historically was a metal ball hoisted up on a steel pole to let locomotives know how fast they could go and whether or not they had the right of way. Unfortunately, we don't have one of those installed today. Fortunately, however, we do have a pretty big crowd here. So I'm going to ask for your guys' help. We're going to ask your highball after me. So it'll be 3, 2, 1, highball. Y'all have the magic word? All right. 3, 2, 1. All right, Jupiter, you have the highball. The Jupiter belongs to the Central Pacific Railroad Company. She was not the original locomotive intended to be here today. See, the Central Pacific in many ways lost the great race to build the Transcontinental Railroad. You know, they built about 400 less miles of track than the Union Pacific. The original place where they intended to join their rails together was Ogden, Utah. If you have anyone local, you know that's a little bit, further east of here, which means that the Union Pacific was able to build more tracks to get here to Promontory. However, the Central Pacific had to work harder for every piece of rail they laid. Every piece of rail, every spike, and every locomotive that they put on the line had to be brought all the way around the tip of South America. Alternatively, you could go through the Isthmus of Panama, but that trip had some hazards as well. If you take the long way around, it can take 4 to 6 months journey on boat. So all of their locomotives have special names. They're somewhat coveted. They're somewhat celebrated. So we've got the Jupiter here. We also had the Antelope. And the Antelope was the original locomotive that was intended to be here today. It was somewhat of a ceremonial locomotive. It was the first locomotive to have ever crossed the Sierra Nevada mountains. Sierra Nevadas were by far the biggest challenge that the Central Pacific faced, and actually one of the last ones that they finally overcame. The Antelope was the first locomotive recorded to have crossed the Sierra Nevada mountains. And Leland Stanley III wanted it to be the one that he took here to Promontory, Utah for the driving of the last flight ceremony. Unfortunately, it ran into issues on its second trip through the Sierra Nevada mountains. Has anyone ever visited those mountains? I don't know, maybe familiar with how rocky they are, how hilly, maybe the trees that grow in them, the Sierra redwoods, the sequoia, the massive ponderosa pines. One of those had been cut by some Chinese rail workers, and after the regular locomotive passed through the tunnel, they loaded the log onto the tracks, not expecting another locomotive to be following so close behind. However, a very important locomotive was in fact following close behind, and the Antelope struck the log on the tracks as it was coming out of the tunnel and around a turn. Interestingly, W.H. Harkness, actually one of the participants in the May 10th ceremony, was riding on the cowcatcher, or pilot, that's in front of the locomotive. He, of course, survived to be here on May 10th, but, this was about the fright of his life and some bumps and bruises. The cowcatcher, however, the pilot was damaged, and of course, if you're Leland Stanford, president of the Central Pacific, you cannot bring a damaged locomotive to the biggest event in railroading of the 19th century. So he was able to commandeer the Jupiter from Wadsworth, Nevada, that's out on the west end of Nevada, dress her up with some ribbons and some American flags, and bring her all the way here to Promontory, Utah. She comes from just being a regular passenger locomotive. She was not specially painted for the event. The blue and red you see on her is historically accurate. She would have continued being a working passenger locomotive after the event. So the engineers will be switching over to the 119. While they're doing that, do y'all have any questions I could answer while we're waiting? The question is, does the Jupiter run off wood or coal? And the answer is wood. Historically, the Jupiter would have run off wood. Again, Railroad Act requires all goods used in the construction of the Transcontinental are American-made. The Central Pacific might have been able to import coal from another country, but it was much easier just to use the wood that's fairly plentiful in the mountains in California. You'll also notice that the ties on the Central Pacific side of the line are milled. So they're very straight, they're very uniform. They came from lumber mills, mostly in the Sierra Nevada mountains. While on the Union Pacific side, we have these sort of rough-hewn, sort of scavenged ties that they just used from cottonwood, anything that they could get their hands on along the line. They did not have a strong lumber industry in the east. This one runs off coal because, of course, you do have a strong coal industry in the east. What do we have over here? Where are the trains from? So historically, they both came from back east. So this one's built by Rogers out of New Jersey. This one's built by Schenectady out of New York. However, our replicas here are from the O'Connor Company out of California. They were reproduced in 1979. I think it's a bit fun that our locomotives, while they are replicas, are older than the originals were when they were sold for scrap. The originals are about 30, 35 years old when they're both melted down in the early 1900s. These are about 45 years old. All right, looks like we have the go-ahead. Are you guys ready to go to the high ball again? Now that you've had some practice? 3, 2, 1, high ball. All right, 3, 2, 1. 119, high ball. I'll invite you to start moving over to the siding. This set of tracks closer to the visitor center. You can stand on either side of the tracks. Looks like if you stay over here, you might get a bit more coal smoke. If that's something you'd like to add to your experience, if that's something you'd like to avoid, looks like you might want to stand closer to the visitor center. You can be on either side of the tracks, but you need to make your decision relatively quickly and just stay on this side of the ropes. You can also remain seated if you would like to remain more comfortable. We will be coming back here with the 119. What we just heard is the railroad crossing. 300 working men, hadn't been paid in about 3 months, and they more or less hold him hostage for about 3 days. They decouple his passenger car from the locomotive, wave the locomotive on across, and derail his particular Pullman Palace passenger car. Of course, he's able to telegraph to his allies to get them to send money and pay those working men about equivalent $5 million in today's money, with money that, of course, isn't his, which is a thing some of his friends have opinions about, of course. Because, of course, if he wasn't delayed in Wyoming, he would have been delayed in Utah, in Weber Canyon, where the Weber Canyon Bridge had been washed out, and a new bridge had to be rebuilt in about 4 days. The new bridge was complete in time, but the engineer did not feel comfortable taking his 60-ton locomotive across. So they pulled across the passenger car very carefully with ropes, as everyone inside and outside held their breath. And the 119 picture car... The 119 was a freight locomotive, but she would have carried his passenger cars as well as a few others here, May 10th, 1869. Coming out of the cab to lay a chain across the tracks. Let's give them a nice round of applause for all their work today. All right, so now that chain is down, you can feel free to get closer to the locomotive, walk around it, take pictures, get on the platforms behind to take a look inside the cab. But we just ask that you do not touch or climb on the locomotives. They are, in fact, hot to the touch, and we spend a lot of time and money making sure they look as nice as they do today. And with that, I'll stick around if you have any questions, and you are free to approach the locomotive.
How's it doing today?
Doing good.
Harder you press down on the gas pedal, the more power you're going to put into the engine, the more speed you're going to get out of the wheel.
So that's more of the steam get into the cylinder?
Yep.
Basically, so more pressure.
So
There's a set of linkages that run from the throttle assembly that goes up into the steam dome there, and inside that steam dome there's a valve. As you pull out the throttle, volunteering here for almost 3 years now, but I can't believe I stopped moving in
This is just amazing. Because it's just
Joe at 14 was the every photo. I don't think I actually